recent years, the label of Breakcore seems to have a very firm aesthetic. You think it's all gloomy, airy, depressing and dark music made for introverted online people. But it wasn't always like this. Breakcore has been around for over 20 years, and around a decade earlier, what people call Breakcore looked very different. The audience used Tumblr rather than Discord, the artist and audience consisted of more furries than anything, the art style was bright, colourful and vibrant, and the music was far more upbeat than you hear today. This was a time when Breakcore and its associated genres had established itself on the internet for the first time. Its wider influence back then was even bigger than it is now. Yet, degeneracy seems to follow wherever this genre goes. And the individuals we'll be looking into today are no exception. Some of these people were recognisable names who completely changed Breakcore as a genre, but their supposed actions they've inflicted upon others range from bizarre to straight up criminal. These are Breakcore's ancient creeps. One of the earliest pioneers of Breakcore as a genre, you may have heard of Renard Queenston or their music, even if you don't know their name. Today, I'd say they're most well known for being the creator of Rubber Band, a song released back in 2009, but it gained popularity in early 2020 following its use in a meme called penis music. The meme went viral and an upload looping it for an hour now has over 10 million views. Born May 22nd, 1988 in Ontario, Canada, Emmett Essex grew up with the internet during the mid-90s. Online, they went under the name 4 Eyes and was more focused on creating fan games using a program known as Click and Play. During their game development days, they would discover the world of music production, and took more and more of a liking to this. This would blossom in 2005, with them posting fast electronic music under the name of Renard, as the genres they would be known for were only just beginning. One thing that will stand out to you if you take a look at sites like Rate Your Music is that Renard has a lot of aliases. Their discography is anything but linear, with many releases through different alters. Their main one, Renard Queenston, is a fox/raccoon hybrid in a nurse's costume. But there's also Mayhem, a guitar playing shark, Jackal Queenston, a brown jackal wearing a uniform very similar to the villains of World War II, or there's Demo D, a pair of cross-dressing crows. An outsider looking in would assume these artists to all be different people, all signed to the same label, but it is all one person, Renard. And it's not like they were some obscure experimental artist. In fact, during their heyday from 2009 to 2014, they were pretty well known. Their music was popular online, frequently used in YTPs or YouTube poops, and they were a significant figure inside the furry community. In 2012 and 2013, they performed entire mega mixes at Anthrocon, one of the largest furry conventions in the world. I know I might be understating how influential Renard was, and that's because I don't have a lot to call back to as it's happened so long ago. But they were one of the main people who influenced the breakcore scene heavily. Music magazines would list them alongside celebrated breaker artists, pillar stones of the genre like Venetian Snares and Igor, but the praise wouldn't last forever. In January 2014, a user would publish a post with a text file on Twitter that started circulating around the breakcore community. In particular, it alleged that Renard Queenston had essayed their partner in their sleep. The text file wasn't archived, but we do have Renard's response, where they immediately admitted it was true and set their account to private. We would soon get more development on the details of this when the victim, known as Nishi, would release their own response to this. To summarise, Nishi stated that they and Renard had been in a fairly sexual relationship. They note it wasn't romantic, indicating this was more of a very close friends with benefits kind of thing. Nishi notes that one of their boundaries was to ask before any touching was done, something that was put in place due to their PTSD from previous trauma. Renard apparently experienced this firsthand during December 2012, in an incident we will learn more about in a bit. Nishi then stated that Renard had a problem with touching people when they think they're sleeping, and had mentioned going to therapy in a previous conversation. This was apparently an excuse Renard had said before, and evidently nothing had changed. Renard also stated the SA was something they did in their sleep, but Nishi notes that there were details that indicated to them that Renard was awake the entire time. This sleep SA happened around 10 to 15 times in 2 visits, and as seen before, Renard admitted they were aware of what happened. However, Nishi stated that despite this admission, Renard did not tell them anything of this over their 1-year relationship. With how these allegations had been made and Renard's statement and silence, it seemed that the case was already closed. And to make things worse, Nishi later made a second statement that went far more into detail on what happened between the two. Nishi and Renard's relationship began with Nishi, a huge fan of Renard's, meeting them and connecting through fan art and the game Second Life, an online multiplayer with virtual avatars. Over time, the two became pretty close friends, but their status would be completely shaken up due to one incident. During December 2012 at a Christmas party, Nishi broke down and left due to some conversation sparking up personal trauma. To calm down, Nishi and Renard decided to cuddle with each other, something that was normal to them by this point. Nishi soon fell asleep, only to be jolted awake by their hand now being grinded against by Renard. Anxious and stunned, Nishi could only try to pull away their hand, but with Renard always moving it back on. After blacking out from the stress, Nishi asked if Renard was okay, and Renard said yes. Renard asked him the same question, and Nishi also said yes. Renard then said, "Good. You're not stupid enough to lie about that kind of thing anyway." A few months later, Nishi settled the issues with Renard and gave him a second chance. This turned into a sexual relationship, and the two met and roomed during Rainforest 2013, a furry convention. During this time, Nishi accuses Renard of coercive consent, guilt tripping, and hurting them during a play fight. This led Nishi to try and blot out the entire event, feeling like everything was a PTSD stupor blur. After Rainforest, Nishi stayed with Renard for a week while still working. After a particularly exhausting day at work, Nishi came home to Renard grabbing their collar and jerking them around. After Nishi told Renard to stop, Renard started choking them, not with full force, but hard enough that they couldn't breathe. Only after Nishi was kicking and hitting their hands did Renard stop. Immediately after, Renard apologized and asked if they were a bad person or if Nishi hated them now. This is very clearly manipulative. This is the point in the timeline where the sleep stuff began. Renard and Nishi's relationship ended in January 2014. Renard accused them of emotional manipulation and later isolated them from their close friends. This led Nishi to start venting about the sleep stuff on his secondary Twitter account, then confiding to close friends. Some of them urged Nishi to talk to Renard about it, but Renard turned them down and said they're being manipulative. And that all led up to this post. At this point, a lot had just been dumped onto the initial accusation. This added so much to what already seemed very bad, and a lot of serious questions were being asked. But there wasn't much evidence to support all this, and that would be the deciding factor for the public when Renard responded on Facebook. Renard's first rebuttal is towards the December 2012 Christmas party incident. As they recall it, this was just an awkward sexual encounter, as Nishi was giving Renard tummy rubs and then grazed their crotch at one point. This was supposedly the green light for Renard, and after a bit, they did end up grinding against their hand. Renard states Nishi did not try to pull their hand away and continue to rub. After it ended, Renard did say, "Good, you're not stupid enough to lie about that kind of thing." However, Renard says that it was just poorly chosen words trying to comfort them because they had been in bad sexual situations before. I'm not sure I buy that as a good explanation. A, that seems way too convenient to me. B, someone rubbing your tummy and then accidentally grazing your crotch is not a green light for being sexual. That was probably just a mistake. Nishi says in the statement that they were sleepy at the time. The next response was to the whole coercive consent and guilt tripping during Rainforest 2013. Renard says they just explored sexual activities they discussed prior, stressing that communication was important between them. Renard said Nishi would often give consent and flirt back physically in the same kind of way, so they didn't feel like anything was wrong, the whole trip was great. Renard also refers to the whole wrestling thing, and recalls they had no reason to believe they had done anything bad. The both of them had fun, and Renard never really heard Nishi express discomfort. This is bolstered by the first supposed piece of evidence we have gotten in this entire thing, a letter that Nishi had written from after Rainforest, which reads, "Thanks for the rad weekend. I'm not good with words, but I think of all the people I know, I feel closest to you. You've done a lot for me, and I wouldn't exist if not for you and your presence. Thank you for everything." There's also a bunch of tweets from the time from Nishi that refers to some of these incidents positively. Flip forward to January, and Renard and Nishi are now discussing getting a pet bed for Nishi to lie in whilst Renard does work. And yes, that's an actual pet bed. This is all in servitude for a master-pet relationship. I don't really know, kinda weird, but what's important is that this also shows more messages, this time from Second Life chat logs. Renard states that over time, Nishi was still stating that they still felt weird about physical contact, which definitely made Renard question things because they had been in a supposedly close relationship, like at Rainforest. Renard believed that Nishi was still thinking about what happened back at the 2012 Christmas party. This is around the time that the sleep incidents began, and Renard gives a much more in-depth explanation than before. Renard notes that they have a sleep-related disorder that makes them start sexual acts whilst asleep and unconscious, meaning that Renard would have no control over what they did. This is direct opposition to the claim that Nishi made that they felt like Renard was awake and conscious the entire time. Renard also notes that Nishi failed to communicate any discomfort with this issue, despite Renard again emphasizing communication. At this point, Renard started to cut Nishi off to focus on themselves, and Nishi started talking about stuff they weren't even aware they had an issue with. Nishi confirmed the sleep stuff was their issue, Renard reacted by being defensive and about it, leading to this accusation being posted. Renard ends off the post by admitting their faults, but standing on the fact that their relationship was not abusive, and announced that they will be once more distancing themselves from the internet. So, after such a complex situation, what is the truth here? Well, after reading and rereading, it's really hard to say. A lot of these incidents are clashing with one another with nothing more than testimony. Acting in good faith to the accused, we'll assume these chat messages and letters are real. In this case, it definitely puts into question why Nishi would say to Renard that their only issue was the sleep stuff before they went public and added this other stuff to paint everything out. With the evidence provided, such as the tweets, it definitely seems like there was a lot more enthusiasm at Rainforest. However, that's not to say that Renard is totally innocent. Once again, the Christmas party explanation just feels really off. Renard doesn't even bother to acknowledge the choking allegation, and the sleep incidents are confirmed. Whilst Renard states that they didn't think it was an issue until then, they do say that they were aware of multiple sleep-related issues in the past, including similar incidents with a former partner. Renard says that they talked about it once and the partner said it was kind of nice, which works out fine for that partner. In your mind, if you've heard of that behavior coming up before, do you not put two and two together if you're with a different partner who doesn't know about it? Renard is very careful with their wording by saying that they didn't think this was an issue, but what they're not saying is that they were fully aware this was a thing that they did. It just didn't become a bad thing until Nishi brought it up. Even in Renard's previous tweets, they say that they knew what was happening when they woke up in the middle of it. For someone who's hammering in the point of the lack of communication, this seems like a major self-inflicted blow, to say the least. Following Renard's statement, their fans would immediately take this as a total debunk of the allegations. Nishi was swarmed with speculation about the status of their previous abuse, downplaying the sleep stuff, and questioning Nishi's race, for some reason. Nishi would respond, first via email with a few brief words, and then they posted another response on Tumblr, dismissing the response as 8 pages of denying abuse. Meaningful sexual interactions were apparently manipulated. Nishi then ends their post by levying a further accusation of lack of credit over the Renard Queenston character. There was one other post that was a part of this that Renard never really responded to. A few days after Nishi's accusation, another person would come out and talk about their experience with Renard. This person, Rasasha, was in a relationship with them from 2008 to 2009 and had their furry character included in Renard's music. In this first statement on Tumblr, Rasasha goes on a rant about Renard simply spearing them behind the scenes as a, quote, angry bitch. People later found the motivation behind this anger from a deleted fur affinity post. To summarise this very in-depth post, Renard and Rasasha were involved with each other about 2 years before this allegation was made. Rasasha accused Renard of a number of things, including being abusive and generally mean towards Rasasha's work, and going back and forth between pretending to break up to see their reaction, and then come back saying everything was forgiven. Renard also apparently took Rasasha's money to fund his Vulpify Records project, and every time Rasasha asked about being paid back, Renard would list all the stuff they bought for them, which again sounds manipulative. Rasasha then goes on to accuse Renard first of cheating multiple times, then directly of SA, including methods of trapping them, or allegedly saying, "I could tell you really didn't mind because you didn't fight much." Renard and Rasasha later broke up, but it didn't end there. Renard later smeared them as playing victim when they contacted Renard seeking closure. Rasasha lost friends and no one really listened to her. In Renard's big response on Facebook, they seemingly acknowledged these claims with this paragraph. "I'm fully aware of the way I've hurt people. I know 5 to 6 years ago, I was in a particularly bad relationship where I was an unforgivable shithead. I took a lot from that relationship, and the guilt I carry is what drives me to be a better person. I was 19 years old and I'm going on 26 now. I've learned so much since then, and I'm not that same person. I understand that some people may not understand how long ago this happened, as when this relationship was talked about, it was prefaced with a while ago. I've wanted to apologize since then, but had no clue how to approach it, so I'm doing it now. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the awful jokes and how I talk down to you. I'm sorry for the cheating. I'm sorry for the insincerity, and just being in a lot of ways." And as far as I can find, this is the only documented response to Rasasha's claims. I'm totally unable to find anything else about this. Renard doesn't directly admit to the SA, but the vagueness and lack of clarification heavily implies something else. And could this also strengthen Nishi's claims because it shows a pattern of behaviour? I wish we could have known, but again, and unfortunately, Renard's fans pretty much shut down any discussion. In most of the public's eyes, Nishi's allegations had been debunked, and Renard had already left the internet. Fans would constantly justify their doubt of Nishi's allegations even before Renard had responded. Let me be clear though, this didn't include everyone. A lot of the people were very vocally disgusted and would distance themselves, but you've got to understand, there's still a reason why Renard has been making music for all these years. From January 2014 to now, not a lot has really happened with Renard in terms of controversy. There was some stuff in 2017, after Renard was caught stealing textures on Second Life, and in 2020, following the blow-up of Renard's song Rubber Band under the Renard Queenston alias, many took offense with the character's uniform, so Renard decided to retire the alias. Despite leaving most social platforms, Renard Queenston has maintained a fairly strong cult following. It's not been stated too much in this video, but Nishi's allegations tore through the furry community when they first dropped. Yet Rasash's allegations, despite being far more severe, have not gained nearly as much attention. The perspective on both of them today still seems to be fairly misinformed in some places, and looking at these claims now in 2026 puts us in a very strange place. Nishi's claims stem from something that happened over 10 years ago, Rasash's claims more than 15 years ago. Has Renard changed since then, and can you possibly come back from admitting to such severe allegations as these two, no matter the time frame? In my opinion, if Renard has done this multiple times as an adult to different people, if Rasash's allegations are true, and what we read here was an implicit admission, events like these will most certainly hang over Renard's head as a looming spectre. Tom Bennett, soon to be known as breakcore artist Futret, was born on August 16, 1994 in Truro, Cornwall, England. Although not a lot is known about his early life, we're aware that he would start posting online at age 13 on a now deactivated DeviantArt account, uploading fun videos for the next year with his family in Cornwall on a channel called Alien Fingers. Though neither of the archives of these accounts exist, it gives us a good timeline of how Tom turned into a breakcore artist. DeviantArt would lead a young Tom down a rabbit hole over the years, which would turn into a liking for My Little Pony and furry culture. In 2011, Tom would move from Cornwall to Kingston upon Thames in London, and began uploading breakcore music under the name of Futret, immediately hitting the ground running with his Cupcakes EP. This release immediately impressed many inside the breakcore scene, and his title track now has over 1 million views over a decade later. It would also earn Futret a dream collaboration with one of the biggest people in breakcore at that point, Renard. In January 2012, Renard would collaborate with Futret on the 3-track EP Gabastag, which ended up getting 800,000 views on YouTube uploads. With Renard featuring on Futret's next EP, titled Gay Dear World Takeover, the Antifabulous EP, this would give Futret the breakcore seal of approval and gave this producer a platform to express himself. By the end of 2012, Futret's growing popularity would only end with him as one of the most promising prospects for the breakcore scene. Except, as he went into 2013, he was very much active via his Tumblr, but musically he hadn't released much, and as is common with these kinds of people, their online silence in productivity and more interest in their fans precedes something sinister. In January 2014, as we've previously discussed, the stuff against Renard was coming out one after the other, but one other aspect that we didn't discuss was that at the same time, Futret would be exposed for some descriptively disgusting actions. A furry Tumblr artist would post a blog on the 19th of January 2014, making similar accusations from before. Now I'm going to keep this artist anonymous, not only because the situation was a lot more clearer and resolved a lot better than Renard's, but also just out of respect because the description of what happened here is a lot more violent and disgusting, to the point where I feel I can't even read it out. But to summarise, this artist claimed he'd met Futret during a stint as a guest artist for a breakcore magazine, and they became friends from there. They both quickly hit it off and decided to meet up in person in August 2013. The artist knows that Futret seemed off when they first met, but they had normal conversations throughout the day, and when he voiced the fact that he was uncomfortable with going back to Futret's house with the intention for anything sexual, Futret reassured him that everything would be fine and they could just hang out. The artist also expressed the need for protection if they were ever to do anything sexual, which Futret seemingly respected. However, things drastically changed once they were there, as Futret immediately started advancing on the artist, who said that he was trying to distance himself. This is where everything gets pretty disgusting, and again it's hard to summarise with the details, but you can guess what happened. I shouldn't have to describe it all. There was obviously no consent. To make it even worse, a few days later the artist received a call from Futret, who told him that he had given him a sexual disease. Alongside this, the artist provided messages testifying that this did happen, starting from Futret's partner, who said, The night it happened, they called me crying from your kitchen, and only said they hurt you, but never elaborated upon what that meant. But they explicitly mentioned you being too scared to say anything when reflecting on the situation, not in a predatory way, but more in an admissive way, like they knew what they did was wrong, and was admitting that in a small way. Futret would also say this, taken from a Skype chat log between him and his partner. And when we met, it was obvious we were in no way compatible as people, and that's why we both got into unhealthy mental states, and that's why everything went wrong, because he was too scared of me to say anything before it happened. Following this, the community was in disarray. Those already reeling from the supposed truth about Renard tried to clutch at anything they could to support Futret's innocence, only to lose more hope when he reblogged the artist's post and retreated from the internet, deleting everything. He would only come back a few days later on the 20th of January 2014 to tell his side of the story as a final message. Futret states that he and the artist had been interested in each other 3 months prior to the incident, and that they tried to meet up before, but Futret got panic attacks and cancelled. On the second time round, Futret again got panic attacks, but pushed through them and convinced himself he was alright. Futret claims that he believed their interaction was mutually consensual, stating that the artist consented multiple times throughout. So why did he call his boyfriend crying from his kitchen? Well, apparently he felt guilty because after it happened, the artist said he'd hurt them, and Futret came to the assumption that he was just too scared to say anything. Futret states that he and the artist talked it over and apologized a day later, and they still seemed like good friends the last time they talked. And as for the disease, Futret claims that 3 days prior to their meeting, he had tested at a clinic, and they told him that if they didn't get back to him in 3 days, he was fine. However, they got back to him 5 days after he tested, confirming he had an infection, so according to him, he wasn't knowingly spreading it. Futret would then inform the artist, and he told him to stop talking to him and started making accusations. Futret ends his tweet longer off by saying that he would be leaving the internet forever and entering therapy to sort out his own issues. His last words posted online are, "If I knew how he actually felt at the time, and if I knew I had an infection, I would not have gone through with any of it. I never wanted to cause anybody any harm, and never want to cause anybody any harm again. That doesn't detract from the gravity of the incident in any way, but I made very bad mistakes, not an assault, and will never let an incident like this one repeat itself." Though upon a surface look, Futret's response might seem reasonable, there are some inherent flaws within it that question its legitimacy. Whilst his testimony stands in stark opposition to the artists, and their interactions in this twit longer sound far more amicable, there were parts that just weren't spoken of, like protection. In the artist statement, they say they had stressed this, and yet Futret just started without any of it, and would have continued if the artist didn't find one in their house. Futret just does not acknowledge this at all, or the fact that the artist said it had been tampered with and torn. Futret also confirms that he later came to the conclusion that the artist was too scared, but suspiciously doesn't give any indication on how he came to such a conclusion, what behaviour stood out, why he was scared. I feel this might be because specifying those reasons would make him look far worse. And to add on to all of that, Futret's version of the story doesn't add up with his actions moving forward. For what he frames as essentially an accident or a misunderstanding, is it really worth him leaving the internet forever, going to therapy, and swearing off sexual relationships as a whole? I'm sure you can agree with me that something here definitely seems left out of the equation. It's worth noting that prior to this statement, a number of Futret's closest friends came forward in a Tumblr post. In this, they stated that Futret only viewed what happened as a mistake since he was having anxiety attacks and being disassociative, a mental health excuse that lines up with his twit longer. These close friends also described him as manipulative, abusive, a victim blamer, and someone who was fully aware of the disease he had at the time. Since leaving the internet in 2014, nothing has been seen of the Futret name or Tom Bennett, at least what we know. Rumours state Tom is now a graphic designer, previously under the name T.R. Bennett on Instagram. He will block anyone who contacts him about his music past and cut them off immediately. Unlike the previous two artists we've covered whose stories are linked, weyheyhey is a very separate person. The best way I can describe him is a sort of breakcore cult hero. Known in real life as Alan McLeod, weyheyhey was a musician in the breakcore community. He released his first EP called Harlot in 2008. Although today his discography seems to be empty, the lack of music doesn't reflect the impact that weyheyhey had. It was his activity on the genre-related Facebook groups, the admiration from others for his talent as a producer, and warm praise from the many who met him in real life that made him memorable for so many people. As a result, the UK-based artist would start to gain somewhat of a cult following. Again, considering how old these stories are, we don't have the full picture. but we know that weyheyhey's relatively small fandom adored him. Some of them were so elitist and loyal to him when it came to Breakcore, with their personalities and talking points summarized in a bingo sheet posted on Know Your Meme. This elitism went further when weyheyhey uploaded a free-to-use Breakcore sample pack in 2012, and many other artists started using it in their songs. And so, this little sample pack made the genre of breakcore itself go stale, because these samples were so good that everyone was using them. That's the kind of impact that we're talking about here. And having to listen to a bunch of music from everyone covered here whilst making this video, weyheyhey's music was definitely my favourite, which makes what happened later such a shame. That being said, with all the memes, discussion and concern, weyheyhey's online presence was very sporadic. He served time in jail in 2008 and 2012, but he told people that it was for fraud. In 2016, he moved to the city of Chiang Mai in the north of Thailand, where he mixed and mastered his last album, Too Much Not Enough. After that, he basically went musically inactive. In 2018, someone asked where he was, and he answered by saying, "Thanks for the kind words. The answer is no, I've moved on to other things. 10 years was quite enough, don't want to outstay my welcome, etc. Love the whole experience." But the reality was really quite revolting. In September 2019, an article was published by Bangkok Extra, titled "Fugitive Brit, 39, Wanted on Child Charges, Caught in Chiang Mai." Weyheyhey, real name Alan McLeod, was caught by immigration police in the seedy Sukhumvit Road red light district in Bangkok, Thailand. The article stated that he'd been arrested in the UK twice for production, possession and publishing of, as well as enticing children through the internet. Alan failed to appear in court in 2012 and fled the country, changing his name from O'Hagan to McLeod, and arriving in Berlin, Germany. He stayed relatively undercover and kept posting music until he left again, this time to Thailand in 2016. The UK embassy in Thailand later alerted the Thai Immigration Bureau of his arrival, and in March of 2019, they would begin an investigation. In July, he was arrested. In a statement from the Deputy Commander of Immigration Police, he said, "McLeod often used social media to lure children under 18 and would change his name before travelling to other places after getting caught. We haven't found evidence that indicates he'd committed a crime in Thailand yet. We have to keep him until all the evidence and information have been gathered. Meanwhile, we are contacting the UK Embassy to arrange his deportation before facing charges in his home country." The news of weyheyhey's arrest hit the community hard, especially for many of his close friends who had no idea what was going on. You may raise an eyebrow at that statement, but weyheyhey was a pretty closed off and reserved individual. Not only that, but he seemed to have lied a lot to obscure his history, evident from the name change. Additionally, in a statement from former friend Speedcore Dave, he said that no one had any idea of what he was actually doing. People were even told he only moved to Thailand for the cheap rent and wanted to leave the UK. His extremely good programming skills made people believe that he was in jail for fraud and hacking. Now, they'd realised that wasn't the case. A few days later, in September 2019, an individual by the name of Alan Nagsworth posted on the British comedy forum Cooked and Bombed, with the title, "My Friend, the Pedophile." I imagine you can guess who he's talking about. It's been 5 days since I found out my friend was a pedophile. When I got the news, me and two other friends, who are not pedophiles, were chatting to a vendor of Caribbean food at the local indoor market. We went outside to get away from other shoppers and to process the information. Admittedly, he had always led a somewhat guarded life, and his moving to Berlin and subsequently Thailand had certainly raised eyebrows, not least of all when he disappeared from social media in Thailand, and only a very small number of a very large group received extremely rare contact from him via email, the rest of us completely discarded. But some people are just weird. He was always a grumpy, unsocial even by his own admission, but I've had some really fun times in his company, and he was quite revered in the breakcore scene as a very talented producer and performer. Turns out the entire thing was a front. Song titles like Tiny Batty and I'm Your Daddy deviously hiding in plain sight. I'm pretty sure he never really considered any of us as friends. He is an evil and his persona has been a gigantic lie. Whenever anyone questioned the well-known secret that he'd served prison time in 2008 and 2012, he said it was for fraud, and that he didn't want to talk about it. We respected that wish. He's been a pedophile for over a decade, right under our noses. During a weekend at a big rave in Berlin, organised by us, of which he was the headline act, we all went out for drinks one night, and we had a cracking time. It's rare we would see him having such a visibly fun time. A bunch of us took photos, and he was in some of them. Afterwards, he remarked how it was that he'd been snapped looking so happy because being a Marias was a big part of his outward persona. Little did we actually know, he was more that there was photographic evidence of his exact location, and there was nothing he could do about it. It wasn't long after that when he moved to Thailand. It all seems so obvious in hindsight, but would you ever feel comfortable labeling your friend a pedophile without any concrete evidence? I'm sure he knew that as much as we do now. This week has been extremely difficult for me. I spent half of it in Belgium, drinking the best beer in the world, but in quieter reflective moments, this has been burning white hot in my mind, and it's an event so abnormal and reprehensible that you just cannot train your mind to be prepared for it. The amount of children and even families he must have hurt and upset across more than 10 years. The fact that he lived in my house for a year or so, and there is no doubt that some of his activity has occurred on our IP address. The police issued photograph with the black strip across his eyes, which removes any sense of identity I want attributed to him and leaves in its place a monster. Unthinkable, abhorrent, terrible beyond belief. I found myself contemplating it, and becoming so angry, I've clenched my fists so tight, my fingernails leave deep imprints in my palms. I've broken down and cried. I'm upset and deeply disturbed. I started off writing this trying to add a sense of humour to quash the disgust squirming in my stomach, but I just can't. It's still too much for me. I'm posting this here both for catharsis, and also in the hope that the inevitable humour in the replies will help alleviate the total black cloud that currently hangs over my mind. All three of these old Breakcore cases vary wildly in their careers, results, and perception, yet all three still have a common through line looking at them today. Their age. These are cases that are years old, and I don't mean to obscure that at all. It's a glimpse into a much more disconnected time and environment, not just for the Breakcore community, but for the internet as a whole. It makes you look at the idea of online allegations in a much more different way. Today, it almost seems like everyone you like turns out to be a freak or some sort of criminal. But things back then weren't as different as you might remember them to be. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe and stay toasty.